My name is David Hermit, and I'm here to present this session on establishing the place of religion and belief in schools. This session is pre-recorded because that gives an opportunity for you to slow down, speed up, an opportunity to have subtitles and other things that should help with this training workshop. One of the reasons I was asked to lead this workshop is because of my involvement in writing this book, Diverse Educators Manifesto. In this book, I was responsible for editing the chapter on religion and belief. Alongside a group of colleagues, we addressed a number of issues around how this works out within the context of schools. My background is as a chief executive of a multi-academy trust, as a head teacher, over 35 years of looking after education in the UK, and also as an inspector. And out of that background, I've been able to draw some key points within the book, working with my colleagues, which I hope you will find valuable. Alongside me today, I've got a guest speaker, Stephen Allen, who was previously a head teacher in Guangzhou in China, and he's going to share a little bit more of a Chinese perspective on this topic. I'll allow Steve to introduce himself.
大家好，欢迎光临. Hello and welcome everyone. I wish I could say more in Putonghua, but despite living and working in Asia for a large part of my working life, I really struggle with tonal languages. And I hope my tones were right there and not all over the place. I'd like to start by introducing myself. My name is Steve Allen, and I've been involved in education for over 35 years, as teacher, school leader, and now as a governor and board member. I lived in Hong Kong and China for 8 years, and oversaw the construction and opening at Lady Eleanor Holler's International School in Foshan, just down the road from you. I worked closely with many of the previous leadership at BSG, through my roles as chair of the Education Committee of the British Chamber of Commerce in Guangzhou, and in setting up the British Schools Forum and British Schools Award with the then Consul General Joe Hawley.
Today, what I'd like to do is I'd like to go through with you a number of issues. First is understanding and responding to the equalities issues that regard religion. And in that section, I'll be talking a little bit more about the bigger picture on religion and how it applies within the UK. And my friend Steve will be talking about how it might apply within China. We also want to be clear about the implications of the Equality Act in the UK and the public sector equality duties, so that you understand what it is that we are working under in the UK. And my colleague Steve will talk a little bit about what it feels like in China. And then the third thing we want to talk about is exploring what the inspectors will be looking for when they come to visit schools. I can speak as an inspector here in the UK, and Steve will speak a little bit about how he has structured his school in China to make sure that it fulfills their legal obligations. And then finally, I'd like you to become a little bit more aware of the impact of policy and practice on what takes place in your school. I'll leave you with a few questions. Our first section is understanding and responding to the equalities issues regarding religion. Most people around the world claim to have a religious faith. It's not something that we can say is just universal to one particular country or part of the world. As we look across the world, the most dominant religion is Christianity. Something like 31% of the world's population would say that they follow Christianity. Followed closely by Islam, Hinduism, Buddhism, folk religions, other religions as well. But as you can see, something like 85% of the world's population claim to have a religion. That's why it's so important to try and make sure that we consider issues of religion within school. Coming back to Christianity, something like 33 million Christians are in the UK. But as you look more closely at this map, you can see that the bits that are most darkly shaded are the parts of the world where Christianity is the most dominant. And you can see that in Africa, in South America, in parts of Europe, Christianity is a very dominant religion. And we can see this area across the centre where actually Christianity is not the main religion, something else is. And that's where Islam comes in. And as you can see on this map, you can see Islam has pretty much covered the middle of this globe. Something like 25% of the world's population follow Islam, but in the UK it's about 2.7 million Muslims. And that's an important group of people within the UK system and the education system in particular. What we're also finding is that there are large groups of people who are saying that they have no religion. Around 16% of the world would fall into this category. The Human Rights Act gives specific protection for people who want to take this position. It gives them the opportunity to be equally valued alongside those who have chosen one of the major world religions or another one. We're finding in the UK that a lot more people are starting to take this position. Something like 32% of the people in Wales and almost a quarter of those within the UK. If you look at the map, you can see that China, where you are now, is one of the major places where people adopt this position of no religion. When we were writing the book, Diverse Manifesto, what we found was that we needed, in the chapter on religion, to spend a lot of time thinking and talking about those people who have no religion. I worked with a number of people as the editor of that chapter to ensure that we had a balance so that people could think about the implications of these three major positions. In this chart, I want to show you a little bit about how UK religions actually affect people's actions. What we found was that if you looked at different parts of the UK, you find very, very different groups of religions who are actually more prevalent. And so we find that within England in particular, the Muslim population is very, very large, followed by the Hindu and the Sikh, and finally we see the Buddhist position there. And that's given us an indication of how those religions are spread across the UK. It's not an even spread. And what we find is that there are certain parts of the UK where we have large numbers of Muslim children. In those areas, we have Muslim schools even, where the religion that the school adopts is that of Islam. Around 25% of the schools in the UK would say that they are Christian religious schools, and the rest do not take any faith as being their position. One of the other things we find is that people attend religious services differently. If you happen to be a Christian, you may well be what we would call a nominal Christian, in that you have decided that you follow Christ, but you don't necessarily go to church. Whereas if you are a Muslim or a Sikh or a Hindu, then generally it means that you take your religion very seriously and you will attend regular services. One of the questions that I was interested in is whether or not we could use ethnicity as a proxy for religion. As you saw in our previous charts, lots of people in Asia would adopt the position of no religion. Lots of people within the Middle East and so on might take Islam or Christianity. So can we look at someone's heritage and understand the likely religion that they would follow? Now, many would say the answer to this is yes. They are more likely, if you're from a global heritage, to be following a religion. But if you happen to be Christian, then because Christianity does go across the whole entire world, then it's not quite as easy. And some people in certain parts of the world do deliberately hide their faith. And so some of the information that we have is not completely accurate. Some shocking facts about the UK. A number of girls in schools particularly were complaining that their headscarves were being pulled. We find that in terms of hate crimes, a lot of hate crimes are directed towards Asian people. Something like 50% of crimes are around public order offences that are to do with causing alarm or distress. As I said, the Asian population is often the target, which means sometimes this is religiously motivated crime. We have no education data set that we can use to try and test on religion in the UK. We would like to know whether or not, but as I've said before, by looking at our ethnicity data, we can get some inkling as to the performance of different religious groups in the education sector. And largely it's quite favourable for Asian students. So in 2020, after I'd finished my career as an educational leader, I went on to become a researcher. And in that role, I've been looking at how children with different religious views feel about their education. For example, in 2020, I did some research in which 2,300 students across the northwest of the UK were asked about their experience during the pandemic. And I broke those views down by religion. And it's very interesting to find that when we ask children directly about how they feel about these things, that actually we are falling into line with what is in our equality legislation. And I'm going to come on to that later on. Children's views on religion should be taken into account. Many of us have citizenship as a main topic within our education, and we will have student councils and other groups that we will put together so that we can hear the voice of children. In my research, what I found was that children with different religious backgrounds do have very different views on their education. I also found that school staff are becoming much more diverse. And as a result of this increased diversity, we're also seeing through that ethnicity an increase in the amount of religions that there are present within our schools. And schools are therefore having to change their approach to religion. They're having to change how they adapt to the students and the staff that they currently have within their schools. We now move to our second section, which is being clear on the implications of the Equality Act and the public sector equality duty. I wanted to come on now to some of the issues around legalities as it comes to equal opportunities. I often ask the question, who is responsible for making sure that we don't fall foul of the equality legislation? In UK schools, it is normally the governors who are responsible for resolving these issues, and they pass that on to the head teacher. And the head teacher would find themselves in a position of having to try and balance all of these different religious viewpoints within the life of school. Human Rights Act in 1998 makes it very clear that that applies in schools. The Equality Act applies in schools. And we also have some health and safety legislation which sometimes conflicts with the freedom of people to wear whatever they wish to wear in different circumstances. There are some very, very challenging legal issues that arise as a result of this. Can we segregate children based on their gender, for example? Some religions do want to do that, and that is a bit of an issue within schools. There's also about denying choice. So we would want every child to have the same education and have access to the same resources, and that doesn't always happen. And so we have some laws that try to ensure that that happens, and so we have some conflicting laws, which means that it's very, very problematic for those in school leadership to know what is the best thing to do in every circumstance. So how do you stay on the right side of equality law? Well, you do need to understand some very, very key terms like discrimination. And in the UK, discrimination can be direct. So it can be discrimination against the individual themselves, but it can also be by association. And so if you happen to be a friend of someone of a particular religion, then sometimes you may be discriminated just for being their friend. It may be indirect. It might be even by perception. As a result of that discrimination, you may face harassment. And then victimization might come into play, which is where people deliberately go out of their way to treat you differently. If that can be proved in UK law, then that can lead to some serious problems. And that's why we have the protected characteristics. And we also have something which we call reasonable adjustments, which is where we can make certain changes based on someone's religion. We can adjust things. So, for example, if you are Muslim, we could adjust things so that you can have access to a prayer room, so that you can pray. And we are expected to take reasonable steps to make sure that you can practice your religion. We shouldn't be putting barriers in front of you. very different in China.
Like BSGReligionv2 was set up as a truly British school, recognising the true characteristics of a liberal education. Even though BSG and LEHF are international schools, there are always sensitivities to consider when discussing areas we would take for granted in the UK or in many other countries. That does not mean we should remove British values, democracy, tolerance and understanding of religion from the curriculum, but rather we need to be more sensitive in planning, presentation and programming. And today I've been asked to address this a little bit as I talk to you about some of the complexities of religious education in China. I would like to cover 3 aspects: religion in China, approaches to religious education in local Chinese schools, and how we approached religious education at LEH and Foshan. Before I do that, I think it's important and helpful to be clear what we mean by international schools. As I'm sure you all know, there are many schools in Guangzhou and in Guangdong that call themselves international schools, but you would not recognise necessarily as an international school. The term international school is not transparent. It can mean, I think, one of 3 things. Firstly, a Chinese school or Chinese state school, a Chinese private school or Chinese state school that has an international section teaching towards international qualifications, typically beyond Zhongkao, so 15 plus. It could also mean, secondly, a bilingual or international high school, typically sponsored by an overseas school or overseas named foundation, but able to admit Chinese students. So this could be one of the Dulwich International High Schools, Harrow, or even the Nord Anglia School in Foshan. And lastly, there is the School for the Children of Foreign Workers, a school that can only admit foreign passport holders. And in a sense, that's what makes it a truly international school. And this is where BSG, LEH, Dulwich, Shanghai fit. The first 2 groups are essentially Chinese schools and are regulated very closely under Chinese education law. They must follow aspects of the Chinese curriculum throughout the students' time at the school, and the oversight of these schools has been tightened repeatedly in recent years. The schools for children of foreign workers are free to set their own curriculum within a certain framework, but must submit textbooks and curriculum plans to the State Education Bureau and are regularly inspected to check that they respect Chinese law and values. And as I said, both BSG and LEH are such schools, and so there is a freedom to be a little bit more creative, I guess, with the curriculum. So let's get to the first part, religion in China. It is a sensitive topic. The People's Republic of China is officially an atheist state, and until about 1984, expression of religion in China was not easy. Since then, enshrined in Chinese law, there is a freedom of religious belief for Chinese citizens and for foreign workers. The Chinese law clearly states that there are only 5 recognised religions: Buddhism, Taoism, Islam and Christianity. But Christianity is split into Catholicism and Protestantism, which is a little bit confusing for those of us who grew up in the UK, but understandable given that they do have quite different emphases at times and have played a different historical part within China. Adherents of these 5 religions are allowed religious freedom. They can gather for worship. Places of worship are not hard to find, such as the Catholic cathedral within Guangzhou, not very far from BSG. You can see mosques across the country, and so on and so forth. That said, children are not supposed to attend, and there is clear state regulation and oversight to ensure that the teachings of these religions, these places of worship, do not conflict with Chinese law. And there's often a tension there between state and church, state and adherents of the religion, but I don't want to get into that because I don't think that's relevant here. There are many other religions within China. Some are accepted, some are not, and some are just simply not considered as religions. So Confucianism and Chinese folk religions are tolerated, they're accepted, but they're not recognised as religions per se, but are rather considered to be part of the nation's cultural heritage. And anyone living in China will recognise the central part they play in everyday life, from mid-autumn and spring festivals to the feng shui considerations of school sites and buildings. And that's certainly something we had a lot to do with when we were building and opening LEH in Foshan.
We now move to our third section, which is exploring what inspectors will be looking for when they visit. What about inspection? Well, I always say that when it comes to inspection, actions speak louder than words. In the UK, inspections are carried out by Ofsted, and when Ofsted goes into schools, it tries to look at things in a three-part way. It looks at the intention. What did you plan to do? The intention. It looks at the implementation of your planning, and then it looks at the impact. And that's how we decide on the quality of education. The public sector equality duty is something that applies to all maintained schools within the UK. It goes beyond just following the law. We have a duty to try and eliminate discrimination, harassment and victimisation. And so that's the first thing that we have to do. We have to try and eliminate it. The second thing we must do is we must do our best to advance equality of opportunity. And we need to prove that we are doing that within our schools. We have to foster good relations, and some of that is between different groups of religions within our schools. So, for example, some schools have found it very challenging in the recent Palestinian conflict because we must show some political impartiality and we shouldn't be taking sides. But sometimes the children within our schools and their parents have already picked a side. And we are trying to be the impartial ones and to foster good relations between opposing groups. We must try and remove or minimise any disadvantage that there might be. We have to take some reasonable steps to meet the needs of people who have protected characteristics. And so for those people of particular religious groups, we should do something to help them. And finally, this is an interesting one. We have to encourage people from protected characteristic groups to take part in public life. And by that we mean we must encourage them to be part of our British values, involved in elections, involved in standing for positions and posts of authority. With our children, this can mean ensuring that there is a proportion of children in our student councils and other groups that come from different religions. All of this is inspected by Ofsted. So when Ofsted comes to look at its first thing, which is intent, what we will do is we will try to make sure that the curriculum that is in place within a particular school does take account of the views and the circumstances of the people that are in that particular school. We want to make sure that you're preparing them for later life, and that might mean being in a different part of the country where other religions other than the dominant religion in their area is prominent. And so we would want people to understand about other religions. We would also want to make sure that students develop skills that might help them to address local gaps. And because of the pandemic, we're very, very interested in what is happening in terms of the recovery of our students after a period of disruption. So I said before that we're interested in the intent. What is your plan? What is it that you thought you were going to do before you actually entered the classroom and anything happened between children and their teachers? Implementation is what happens when children come into the classroom. And we want to find out to what extent the school and its teaching is helping to address gaps in their knowledge, because the Ofsted framework assumes that to be better at something means having greater knowledge and understanding of something. And what better way of proving that is whether or not you can remember what you have been taught. We're particularly interested in whether or not students who face some form of disadvantage, whether or not they are well catered for within how lessons are taught. And this is where sometimes children from certain religious groups become a larger group within the school who perhaps might be suffering some disadvantage. We want to ensure that teachers know the most important knowledge and concepts that they need to transfer to children, and that they're testing children on whether or not they understand those things. And so as we go and visit lessons, what we do is we try to find out firsthand whether what was planned is actually being implemented. The final phase of our work really is to look at the impact of this work. And our view is that if students are getting really, really great exam outcomes, then that's a really, really good proof of impact. But it can go beyond that. It's about how broad, how rich the curriculum is, and it's not just about exam success. And we do feel that we should be looking towards an endpoint, and the endpoint is preparation for the next stage. And so we do look at where students go on from different schools, where they go to, whether they go to employment, whether they go to university, and we look at to what extent the school has acted and helped them to have an impact. When it comes to outcomes, some people in the UK have been debating about whether or not we should use the word outstanding. But certainly what we've tried to do is we try to give greatest accolades to those schools that take their responsibilities for equalities very, very seriously. And so in order to be an outstanding school, you have to be good at dealing with equality and diversity issues. Our fourth section is around becoming aware of the impact on policy and practice in school. Strategic plans, I think, are very, very important, because that is how we can try and turn our priorities into a set of actions that might lead to change. I wonder what your school has in its strategic plan about religion. I wonder if actually you're silent on this topic. A lot of schools are. A lot of schools focus on other things because they don't want to talk about religion, because perhaps it might be a divisive topic. However, it's very, very important that we do consider it as part of our long-term strategic planning. How are we going to ensure that religion and belief as a protected characteristic is implemented within our school? Here are some practical issues for school leaders. Spiritual development within the UK is a legal responsibility. It's not something that you can avoid. And so every school must give an account of how it's dealing with that. In the book, we talk a little bit about whose rights should take responsibility. And Jacqueline Newson talks about the difficulties when actually the numbers of these different ethnic groups and religious groups start to become in a certain balance. Whose views should take precedence? Some of the other staff that have written in our book have talked a little bit about the rights of staff to wear their religious symbols. How does your school sit on that? Whether or not someone should wear a cross, or whether or not someone could wear something else that symbolises their religion, maybe wearing a headscarf. Some really conflicting information about whether or not we should encourage staff to speak about their faith. In the book, we talk about how sometimes if you happen to be of a minority faith, like Jewish faith, then to what extent should you be talking with students about your faith? And what we found is that actually sometimes people who have a religious conviction can be a valuable resource, particularly if it's done in the context of cultural education and not just in the context of religious education. Sometimes the majority of your children may be from one particular dominant religious group. And if that is the case, it's very, very important to ensure that other religions are introduced to them so that they can take a place in understanding those other religions when they are working in the workplace alongside people who may be different to themselves. And finally, prayer is quite an important part of the Muslim faith. And increasingly in the UK schools, what we're finding is that children and their parents are coming forward and requesting that there may be prayer rooms set aside so that at certain times of the year, at certain times of the day, they can go to pray. What's your school view on that? Is that something that you want to support, or is that something that you would not want to deal with? All these issues change as the numbers of children from different religious groups within your school changes. Some schools, when asked why they haven't done what they should have done around religion, they will say as their excuse that they've had a lack of capacity, often a lack of time, a lack of money. I would say that students do need to develop religious literacy skills and have a safe place to discuss religion, and everybody should be able to create that space for them. In terms of the workforce, very, very important that the workforce develop religious literacy, and that more and more the workforce reflects the religions of the children that are present within the school, so that the school can be more of a cohesive whole. It's also important that within the curriculum that we do take account of the different potential views around religion, and that they are carefully woven in to a number of subjects so that it can be seen not just as a religious issue, but as an issue that permeates whole society. And finally, in the policies that you do need to ensure that the policies do have a commitment to equality as a fundamental part of all that you do. You may want to go further than that, and you may have plans whereby the calendar throughout the year gives an opportunity for different faiths and different religions to be revisited, so that they can be revisited perhaps in a cultural way. It may well be that at the time of Ramadan in April, that you may well want to visit that particular religion and talk about it more from a point of view of the customs of that religion. In June, you might want to look at World Humanist Day, because again, for those people who have no religion, it's important that that position is established within your normal year. And in December, we do have human rights as being a good focus. And so rather than just only looking at the traditional religious festivals, you could add in other things as well. Finally, creating positive memories. It strikes me that respecting and showing tolerance for other religions can be shown by just having immersive work. And by that I mean events that take place in the life of the school where that particular religion has a focal point. I've talked about the calendar already, but there may be other things. For example, music concerts. And why not have gospel music as a focus of a music concert? Why not have some other type of ethnic music that might include thinking about the religion that goes with that music? You can go on trips. And as you go on trips, you could visit religious buildings, but not from a point of view of religion, but maybe to have a look at the artwork that's present within them or the architecture. And so what you have is the opportunity to learn more about religions, but not necessarily it being just in a religious context. Wedding dances is a really, really interesting topic that can go across a number of different religions as to what they do. And of course, international trips. It's always good as an international school to have a little bit of an international trip at some point through the year.
State schools in China do not provide any form of religious education, but they do teach about belief systems. Now, that's not just semantics, that's quite a clear difference. They teach about the works and the teachings of philosophers and ethics within an historical and cultural context. In other words, about how they've helped to shape and develop China into the country it now is. In general, the programme within Chinese state schools follows an approved moral education curriculum rooted in Confucianism. And we all know that there's that sense of values which is very, very important within China. And those values do permeate society, although it's not always easy for someone like myself, who's not grown up in China, to always understand the nuances of that. Western religions, Islam and Christianity, are studied purely as an academic exercise, and typically not until university level. Those schools, such as the international high schools, bilingual schools, which offer the IB program, are allowed to teach the IB philosophy program at diploma level. And this does touch on religion, but it tends to do it through a more academic, more understanding of the various ways in which religion operates, as opposed to understanding a particular religion per se. And I think it's fair to say that Chinese students within China, find that particularly difficult because it's not clear-cut. There's not a wrong answer like there is in maths or physics. And that sense of discussion is harder. And so it's not always a popular course, but I think it is a very important course. So what about schools for children of foreign workers? How might they approach religious education? Well, at LEH we took the view that we could not set out a part of the curriculum called religious education the same way we had geography and history as part of our humanities carousel. We were very clear, however, that it is part of a British education and therefore should be part of the educational diet of our students. We took the view that it could take a philosophy and ethics approach within a broad personal, social, health and citizenship curriculum. At LEH, the PSHCE curriculum was broadly split into 3 areas: health and well-being, relationships and sex education, and living in the wider world. It was designed as a spiral curriculum that revisited each topic twice per year, allowing for the development of topics with the growing maturity and inquisitiveness of students. Within the living in the wider world category, students met units on Chinese philosophy and ethics first, what happens within the country, and progressed through Buddhism, Christianity and Islam at later stages of the school life. An emphasis was very much placed on understanding beliefs and practices held by different peoples and upon promoting understanding and tolerances of differences rather than in any way promoting any one of those religions. So one might take a view that it's looking at, if one is an adherent of Buddhism, what does murder mean? What is abortion? What is euthanasia? And so on and so forth. Was designed so the whole school had lessons at the same time. And staff were asked to volunteer to teach within certain topics. Everyone taught within the programme, but they taught within their comfort zone. So it could mean that in one unit they were teaching a year 7 class, and in another unit they were teaching a year 11, 12 or 13 class. It was helpful in a young school, in a small school, in ensuring that all staff knew all students as well, so that there are other referred benefits. So I guess that paints how LEH has ensured this sense of equality, diversity is covered, and how we embed and enshrine the true British values of democracy, tolerance and understanding of religion within the curriculum, within the framework of living in China. So, in summary, teaching about religion is acceptable within China, but staff must be very aware of the social and political context. It's very helpful to involve staff with a local background, so whether that's some of the support staff or some of the perhaps the Chinese language and cultural studies staff, who were born and grew up in China and have a real wealth of experience within this area. And so at EDH we co-authored the curriculum involving our local staff and seeking guidance whenever we were uncertain, and I think that's essential. Care should always be taken not to promote a faith, but to promote understanding of the diverse world in which we live, to promote tolerance, understanding, and a sense of there is a way we can all live together and we don't have to be at loggerheads with each other all of the time. A philosophy and ethics approach is acceptable, and one piece of evidence for this is that the IPDP philosophy programme is accepted and recognised by the State Education Bureau within China. It can be part of a BSGReligionv2 programme, and perhaps that's a creative way of getting around some of the concerns and without being direct and perhaps seem to be confrontational with the State Education Bureau. And again, I want to re-emphasise the point that it's helpful when it promotes understanding, tolerance. It's really essential within that equality, diversity, inclusion that is now essential and really important, and I'm glad it's a really important part of a truly British education. Thank you for listening. I hope that's been helpful. If there are any further questions, please do get in contact with either Dave or myself, and we will be happy to discuss this further. That's it.
So, 4 key actions in summary that you might be able to take as leaders and as people within your school. You can seek the views of stakeholders about religion. You might want to consider setting up focus groups to discuss what can be improved in your school. You might want to support students and staff from marginalised religious groups by providing things for them. You may want to be more careful in your recruitment to try and ensure that you get a balance of staff from a diverse range of religious views. And by doing that, create a community of people who may feel that they are more religiously diverse. And so that's it from our workshop. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you have any questions, then please do not hesitate to contact me. You can contact me at that email address, david@enjoydesign.co.uk. My colleague Steve, I'll pass on anything to him. It's been a real pleasure for us to be presenting this presentation to you today. I hope you've enjoyed it, and I hope you've had some value from it. And thank you very, very much for your attention. Thank you.